The Scottish Government's plan to introduce a deposit return scheme for single-use drinks containers has been dogged by controversy. And today came confirmation from the Minister in charge of the policy that it cannot now go ahead as planned. Lorna Slater is blaming the UK Government, which refused to allow the scheme to proceed unless it exempted glass bottles.
It is clear that Scotland's deposit return scheme, in the scope and form passed by this Parliament, cannot go ahead as currently planned. Over the last 10 days, and right now, we are urgently establishing to what extent there is a way forward for a modified scheme.
Over the past week, the SNP Green Coalition has gone from mess to meltdown on deposit return. They've threatened to scrap it. They've tried to pick a fight with the UK Government, and they've been caught misrepresenting one of Scotland's leading drinks producers.
After the delays and grandstanding between the UK and Scottish Government, we deserve better than this. To get a viable DRS scheme, both the UK and the Scottish Government should get round the table as quickly as possible, especially given that Circularity Scotland today said the scheme could go ahead.
Our scheme, as this Parliament passed, cannot go forward. We know that that's the case. Is there an alternative scheme that can be made from the pieces that the UK Government has left us? That is what we are rapidly assessing with business stakeholders and with Circularity Scotland.
Lorna Slater was unavailable for interview this evening, but we debated the matter with the Green MSP Mark Ruskell and the Conservative Jamie Halcro-Johnston. Mark Ruskell, we're talking about finding a way forward to implementing the DRS. Isn't that way forward simply to do it without glass?
Well, the last-minute exclusion of glass that the UK government wants, of course, critically undermines the scheme. It makes it less economically viable, and it removes many of the environmental benefits that were envisaged at the outset of DRS, the reduction in litter, the reduction in climate emissions, the increase in recycling. So it would be a lesser scheme if it didn't include glass within that. But clearly industry is now looking at the figures. They're looking at whether a scheme without glass is indeed economically viable and whether something can be salvaged out of it. But I have to say this last-minute exclusion of the UK government has really jeopardised investment, and it's destroying business certainty. Around Scotland, tens of millions of pounds are being invested in infrastructure right now. Many of your viewers will be seeing that infrastructure appearing in supermarkets. And this last-minute decision by the UK government really throws a lot of that investment under the bus.
Jamie Halcro-Johnston, a last-minute decision that is causing economic uncertainty.
I think the idea that this is causing economic uncertainty or uncertainty with the scheme is really for the birds. This scheme, almost since the beginning, has been one marred with lots of unanswered questions and real confusion from the Scottish Government. And again, the idea, which has been repeatedly put forward by Lorna Slater, that the Scottish Government are ready to go for this scheme is simply nonsensical. I've spoken to nobody within the business sector or those who are looking to have to deliver it who say that's the case. There is still huge amounts of work to be done. And even today, Lorna Slater said they wouldn't know whether they could launch in March next year. I'm afraid it's just simply not true to say that that's what's caused the uncertainty. It's Lorna Slater and this shambolic rollout.
You're shaking your head, Mark.
That's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. I mean, it's clear that Jamie has not spoken to the business, Circularity Scotland and BIFA, who will actually be delivering the scheme. These are reputable organisations that have invested tens of millions of pounds. Now, for a Tory politician who is meant to understand and respect and want to see business thrive in Scotland, I find it incredible that he is unaware of the extent of the investment that's been taking place in Scotland. All of that is under risk. And it's real jobs in real communities. Hundreds of people have been employed already in delivering the DRS scheme. Recycling centres are being set up. Reverse vending machines are being invested in supermarkets. So this is real economic activity, real jobs with real organisations. This isn't a sort of a debate in Scottish Parliament where we can disagree on the concepts and everything else. This is a real debate about real jobs, and there is real progress. The industry was ready to launch this scheme in August. They've had to put it back because of UK government uncertainty. Now the entire scheme is under threat. That is drastically irresponsible.
You're not accepting that, Jamie?
No, I'm afraid, sorry to repeat, Mark, but that's nonsense. I mean, to cite two companies, two organisations, Biffa, who are obviously I think have this huge contract with Circularity Scotland, and Circularity Scotland, which is one organisation which has said that they can go ahead with the scheme in terms of with glass going forward. Again, in contrast to what the First Minister and Lorna Slater have said, it ignores the hundreds of businesses out there that's saying they're simply not ready, who are saying that they simply haven't got answers to all the questions, that they're simply not being listened to by Lorna Slater and the SNP Green government. And to selectively pick two organisations, two businesses, and say we've been listening to business, as Mark's just done there, is remarkable. And I would really love to know what other businesses he's been talking to, because the ones that we've been speaking to, even a few months ago, we had a session with I think it was around about 60 small producers and other businesses that will be part of the delivery, because they will have to store cans and bottles. So they will have to make sure that they're spending a huge amount of time on it. They didn't have answers to the questions that they needed, even then.
And Mark, small businesses do say that they have told you repeatedly that this isn't going to work. And on Circularity Scotland, they're insisting, as Jamie Halcro-Johnston has just said, the scheme can go ahead without glass.
No, look, this is not correct. There's been endless discussions with businesses of all scales in different sectors. And as a result of that, amendments have been made to the scheme by Circularity Scotland. Lots of amendments have been made to address those concerns. And now we have a final scheme with the final rules. This is ready to go. I mean, in terms of whether a scheme is viable without glass or not, that is a question not just for the scheme administrator, Circularity Scotland. It's a question for the whole sector. But what we have seen is investment from big players, from AG Bar, from Pepsi, from Coke. 95% of the market signed up on day one. And although some very small producers had some concerns, a lot of those concerns have now been addressed. And indeed, some of the smaller producers have been exempted from the schemes. Online take-back has been exempted from the scheme as well. So government has listened. There's a scheme that was ready to go in August. And the fact that the UK government has now actually written to the Scottish government and said, actually, the scheme's fine, but we don't want you to include glass. We're going to put in a whole range of other conditions as well, suggests to me that they know that the reality of this is that there's a scheme ready to go.
And Jamie Halcro-Johnston, the First Minister, on the basis of this, is accusing the UK government again of this being an attack on devolution.
Yeah, and it's a line that they've used again and again to deflect from the utter shambles that they've put forward of this scheme since almost kind of day one. I mean, just taking up what Mark said there, the British Soft Drinks Association has said the only viable option was a UK-wide deposit return scheme. The Scottish Licensed Trade Association said that the Scottish Government should have got the Internal Markets Act exemption before the scheme went ahead. There's so many organisations that are out there representing businesses of all sizes that have concerns with it. The Scottish Retail Consortium said it was unworkable, unsustainable and undeliverable, and that the government wasn't listening to retailers' concerns. I'm sorry, but Mark quoting two organisations at the heart of this scheme and ignoring all the other ones really just shows how desperate the defence of what this symbolic scheme is.
We've only got a short time left, so very, very briefly, Mark Ruskell, will this go ahead? And if it does, is it potentially just the same as the UK-wide scheme?
Well, there isn't a UK-wide scheme. There was an agreement that there should be a Scottish and a Welsh scheme. That was what the UK government agreed to. There is no English scheme at the moment at all. So some of the conditions the Westminster government is putting on the Scottish scheme, that it has to work with an English scheme, is very difficult to achieve right now, because there is no scheme in England and there appears to be no plan, no agreement on rules, no scheme administrator. So that is a fantasy, unfortunately. If we're going to make progress with DRS in Scotland and the UK, it has to happen, and it has to happen now.
And very briefly, Jamie Halcro-Johnston, are you happy for this not to go ahead in Scotland?
Well, I want to see the scheme align with the UK scheme and to be able to deliver that. I think that's what business want, and that would provide a better scheme.
And there, I'm sorry, but time has run out. We will have to leave it there. But Mark Ruskell, Jamie Halcro-Johnston, thank you both for joining us.